And of course, your stance against earmarks was central to your campaign. National Review magazine, which is the conservative magazine, is accusing you now of selling out on that issue, and has pointed to a shift.
They need to interview me before they accuse me of selling out. I was misquoted by the Wall Street Journal because I will not earmark anything, and I will not support earmarks. I've signed a pledge. I've signed my word of honor that I will not do that, and the reporter misinterpreted it. Now everybody's jumping on me before they've even had a chance to ask me. So I am not in favor of earmarks and will not earmark any legislation.
I want to put up on the screen, just for the benefit of our viewers, just some basic numbers, what the budget is and what the deficit is. And you know these numbers, I'm sure. A budget of about $3.8 trillion and a deficit of about $1.3 trillion. And then a second chart that's going to show folks where the money really goes, $2.3 trillion of it to these programs, Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, defense and interest. Now, you've been asked over and over where you want to cut, and what you've said is across the board. Is that correct?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Now, but then here's what mystifies me. You're a doctor, and I think, am I correct, 50% of your practice came from Medicare and Medicaid, government, federal reimbursements to you for practicing medicine. Is that correct?
Right.
Now, am I correct then that you've said, and I got to read this right here, that the one place you don't want to cut is doctor reimbursement rates?
You've been reading too many liberal bloggers. Let me set you straight there.
Senator, is it correct you don't want to cut those?
No, let me set you straight. What I have said is that, look, if we want to cut physicians' fees automatically without a vote, let's lump all federal employees in there, senators, congressmen, and all 2 million federal employees, and let's automatically cut their pay every year without a vote, and then I'm all for it. But right now, let's don't single out one set of people and say that somehow we're going to balance the health care budget on one set of people. The problem is that ultimately, if you keep reducing, for example, if physician fees go down with Medicare by 30% as they're designated to do in December, you won't find a doctor. I think we need to think about, do we want to have doctors available to see patients? And I think you'll have a major problem.
Senator, but I'm correct in saying you've opposed cutting Medicare reimbursement rates, even though the Medicare system is the single largest deficit hole we are facing as we look at our budget, and reimbursing doctors is the largest piece of that.
You do have to figure out how to balance the Medicare budget, and it's going to take a lot of different things to do it, but you can't balance it simply on one facet.
Right, but
what you should do is that if you want to cut physician fees, which you need to acknowledge to your viewership have already been cut by 50%. When I started in '93, fees are now 50% of what they were in 1993. So they already have been cut by 50%. What you have to picture is you want to cut them by 40% more, fine, go ahead, but there may not be any doctors left seeing Medicare patients. So don't stick your head in the sand and say you're going to fix this problem and all will be hunky-dory again. It won't work. You won't have any doctors to see patients.
Senator, doctor, I'll call you both. I don't want mean to be impertinent here, but what was your peak income over the last decade? What's the most you earned in any 1 year?
If you want to make this about me personally, you're not going to have a real intelligent discussion. But if you want to make this about, I mean, do I want to go into your personal past and talk about your past on this program? I don't think so.
Senator,
let's talk about things about how we fix Medicare.
That's what I'm trying to do. There are going to
be ways we have to fix Medicare. For example, Part B is only 25% paid for by taxes and premiums. So it's 75% paid for out of the general budget. So I think we have to figure out how do we pay for that. That may include talking about eligibility in the future, talking about changes in age. It may talk about changes in premiums. It may talk about means testing. And there are honest people discussing these things as we speak, but we're not going to really make any point about trying to vilify doctors for making a good living.
Again, I want to come back to your words, across-the-board cuts. I want to talk about numbers for Kentucky, if we might, right now. I've got actually printout here that's very informative that shows me exactly how much federal money has been spent in Kentucky, and I want to go through some of these to see if you're willing to do the sort of 25% cut that we would need to balance the budget. Social Security and SSI, Supplemental Security Income, $11.7 billion to Kentucky residents. Would you cut that by 25% so you could balance the budget the way you want to?
Well, no, I think what we have to do is look at certain programs that we don't need to be doing at all at the federal level. And if you eliminate some of those entirely, then you don't have to be as draconian with other things.
Can you specify which ones?
Well, let me finish my answer. What I would also say is that Social Security and Medicare, I've said repeatedly, we're not for changing any of the eligibility or any of the payments for those currently on. We're talking about the next generation. We're talking about typically most of the people who want to have an honest discussion about this are talking about reform of those 55 and under. But you have to immediately start making these decisions. And if you don't want to have the discussion about how we fix this, what you need to be doing is bringing liberals on your program and asking them, how do you continue to have these programs? What I'm saying is we need to fix these programs that you can't continue to borrow money from China to pay for your daily expenses.
Senator, here's the problem. You have said as recently as today that you do not want to take a position on increasing the federal deficit level because you plan to go to Washington in January and propose a balanced budget. Now, in order to close a $1 trillion budget gap in this next fiscal year, we're going to have to cut 25%. And I just gave you the single largest program in the federal budget, and you said you won't touch it. Now, let's go to defense spending.
No, that's not
what you just
true.
said, sir.
You're mischaracterizing my position. We do have to look at Social Security, and we do have to look at Medicare. Some of those cuts will be more gradual or will deal with younger generations. But you will have to look at the entire budget. The main thing you have to have is you have to have rules. We have had a pay-as-you-go rule, and they've broken it. They pass it, and within 3 weeks, they evade their own rules. What you need to do is have a balanced budget amendment or a rule, and that they have to adhere to that. We have that in Kentucky. We have that in 32 states. Doesn't work well in all the states, but it does work fairly well in Kentucky. You force the legislators to make difficult decisions. So much of this is about the process as it is about the particulars. The second thing you do is you have to come up with a compromise. The compromise typically has not occurred because you have Republicans who say, oh, we'll cut domestic spending, but we're unwilling to cut military spending. You have some liberals on the other side who are deficit hawks and who are serious and who say, oh, we'll cut military spending, but we won't cut domestic spending. The bottom line is the compromise is you do have to look across the board. But there are entire books written on this, and you want me to point out each and every program. There are thousands of pages that go into the budget, and there are thousands of people that go into preparing the budget. I will be preparing a budget over the next 2 months, and it will include a balanced budget. And I will give people different alternatives. I will give them a one-year budget. I will give them a one-year budget, and that will have significant cuts. It may not be palatable to many people. There will be budgets that will be balanced over 2, 3, 4, and 5. But the thing is what we cannot do is simply put our head in the sand and keep doing what we've been doing.
Senator, if I can tell you, you're learning one thing very well, but even before you get to Washington, which is how to filibuster. But what I plan to do is go through and ask you a few questions, specific programs, the biggest ones, federal dollars into Kentucky, to see if you right now are willing or not to be true to what you ran on, which is a balanced budget. Now, let's go to the next program. Let's go to the next program.
Let me explain to you what I am for. If you want to ask questions, let me answer the question.
No, I haven't asked the question yet, sir.
I
want to ask you about a program, and then we will see if you want to cut it.
My answer to the question is that nothing is off limits.
Well, then
nothing is off limits, and we will. Let me finish. The other thing is that we will look at each individual program, and we will do a stepwise process to this. We will say, can it be downsized? Can it be privatized? Can it be eliminated? Or can we not look at this program at all because it's too important that it can't be cut? So we will look at this in a stepwise fashion, and we will look at everything within the budget, and we will make those determinations. But I'm not prepared to look at all 1,000 different categories and tell you exactly what we will cut from each one, other than to tell you that I'm serious about doing this, and I will introduce a budget, and we'll be happy to come back on in January if you want to go into each individual item. But I think it's impossible to go through each individual item of the budget and tell you exactly what percentage and what we will cut at this juncture.
Well, the good news is we have loads of time right now, and you haven't given us a single cut yet. And we're not going to go through 1,000, but we're going to continue through some of these big approaches. Senator, I let you finish. Senator, I let you finish, sir.
$1 trillion from Obamacare. We'll cut $1 trillion by repealing Obamacare. It's a $1.2 trillion program.
Okay,
how about the TARP funds? A couple $100 billion in TARP funds. Why don't we send those back? How about the unused stimulus funds? A couple $100 billion. Why don't we send those back?
Sir, the Obamacare that you love to malign, according to the Congressional Budget Office that you have been referring to, will save over $1 trillion over the next 10 years. The TARP money does not affect the next year's budget.
The tenor of this discussion hasn't been useful for the country, and I think somehow your personal agenda is getting in the way of making you a very good broadcaster. So I'd suggest that we have one more question, and then we have to move on to another previously scheduled interview.
Sir, the tenor of a campaign in which you say you're going to balance the budget and cannot name a specific cut suggests to me that that debases politics, and I've been in politics. Here's what I would love to do. When you propose that budget, which is balanced, we look forward to having you back on, and I'm sure by then you will have gone through the 1,000 programs, and we can go through one by one and figure out where these cuts are, because honestly, sir, as of now, I don't see the budget cuts in your agenda. Thank you, sir. We'll be right back.